Not online, not on campus. Honor, empower, act, refer and reach out, trauma-informed care. HEART. How to respond empathetically to a disclosure of gender-based violence. Welcome to this training by YWCA Canada. This initiative is possible because of the supports of many people who support and believe survivors of gender-based violence. YWCA received funding from two key sources to make this happen. We are grateful for the supports of the Impacts Project and the Canadian Women's Foundation. The Impacts Project is an initiative to address sexual violence on university campuses across Canada and internationally. They are funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. This resource has also been supported with a grant by the Canadian Women's Foundation and its partners. This session will take at most 1 hour to complete. You can start and stop at any time. Through the session, we offer tips, techniques, and strategies that anyone can use to respond to disclosures with compassion and respect. Everyone who has experienced violence needs a safe and supportive place to go, where they are believed and not silenced or shamed. It's hard to know who to turn to and what resources, options, and supports are available on college and university campuses. YWCA Canada has developed the HEART model to equip all members of campus communities to empathetically and appropriately respond when someone discloses their experiences of gender-based violence. YWCA Canada's national office is located in Takaranto, also known as Toronto, the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This work is taking place on Turtle Island, specifically on the land known to settlers today as Canada, which holds the traditional territories of many Indigenous, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. In doing anti-violence work, it is important to recognize the colonial nature of gender-based violence, which has long been used to remove Indigenous peoples from their cultures, lands, and waters. The past continues to influence current lived realities, and in striving to create a safer space for those who have experienced violence, we must decolonize and indigenize our structures and responses. Without structural and systemic change and accountability, violence will continue to prevail in our societies. Take a moment to now reflect on the land where you work, learn, live, and play. About YWCA Canada. For over 150 years, YWCA Canada has worked to advance gender equity by responding to urgent needs in communities through national advocacy and grassroots initiatives. The YWCA Canada movement has been at the forefront of providing critical frontline services and programs from a trauma-informed and harm reduction approach. At the YWCA, we run the largest network of shelters and affordable housing for women, gender-diverse people, and their families in Canada. It is the second largest provider of childcare and the largest provider of literacy, life skills, employment counseling, and services to women. We build, engage, and invest in diverse young leaders. The information presented in this training is rooted in the on-ground experiences and reflects the needs, expertise, and wisdom of the women, gender-diverse people, and youth served by YWCAs across Canada. This project extends YWCA Canada's ongoing work to end gender-based violence and respond to the needs of academic institutions across the country that are at varying stages of violence prevention and response work. Acknowledgements. Special recognition goes to the YWCA associations who led focus groups with students and experts in this field and reviewed and shaped this training and tool. A heartfelt thank you to all those who joined YWCA Canada's student focus groups and key informant focus groups. Their support, insights, and research guided this resource to be the most impactful in post-secondary spaces. Gender-based violence is an epidemic that has affected many communities and spaces. Through YWCA Canada's research, it is clear that college and university campuses are not immune. We heard that there are not enough resources on campus, specifically on smaller or more remote campuses, that can support people who have experienced gender-based violence. The research also told us that there is a lack of awareness around gender-based violence that happens on campuses, and even when it is known, it is seen as something that is just part of the college experience. Trainings and resources can be limited in these spaces, specifically those that are rooted in an understanding of patriarchy, rape culture, misogyny, power, and control. If they do exist, they are both difficult to find and there is an overwhelming sense of fear in accessing them. We know that when someone experiences gender-based violence, it is a difficult time emotionally. Folks feel overwhelmed, stressed, embarrassed, and isolated. Taking the time to learn about what to do and how to support in those moments can make the difference in someone's healing journey. Through these resources, we hope to be able to provide people at colleges and universities with the tools and self-care tips they might need when interacting with someone who has shared that they have experienced gender-based violence. A shift towards proactive rather than reactive approaches to experiences of gender-based violence in these communities will ensure that individuals have the information they need to be able to handle these situations before they happen. Proactive approaches are essential when working towards preventing and disrupting rape culture, the societal norms that tolerate or trivialize sexual and gender-based violence. Everybody has a role in the prevention and response to gender-based violence, and by taking this training, you are contributing towards a culture free of violence. This training will offer you information to respond with heart, honor, empower, act, refer, and reach out, trauma-informed care, when someone approaches you to disclose that they have experienced violence in the community, online, or on campus. We hope that through this training you will learn more about the umbrella term gender-based violence and all it encompasses, as well as its prevalence in Canada. Advance your understanding of intersectional, anti-oppressive, and trauma-informed approaches to support people. Gain skills in providing effective and empathetic responses to disclosures of gender-based violence from a survivor-centered and trauma-informed lens. Accessing a step-by-step guide for helping the person who is disclosed to you navigate their support options. Explore your own school and community supports and policies, and receive self-care tips and suggestions that enable both people who have experienced violence and those to whom they disclose to recognize and support their own needs and healing. What is HEART? To make it a bit easier to remember key steps in supporting someone who has experienced gender-based violence when they disclose, we developed a mnemonic. The HEART method to respond to disclosures offers a way that honors and believes survivors without judgment and with the utmost compassion. Honor. We believe the person who is disclosed to us and we honor their autonomy. Empower. We ensure that individuals who experience violence are empowered to decide the course of action and support they choose. We don't enforce or tell them what to do. Act. We get into action by supporting the person to take the steps they choose. Refer and reach out. We connect them with the resources in community and on campus according to their wishes and needs. Trauma-informed care. Throughout the process, we commit to minimizing stress, not re-traumatizing them, and acknowledge their healing journey, providing different pathways. We begin with honor. To better support people who have experienced gender-based violence, it is important to understand the background of what they are up against. Gender-based violence, or GBV for short, happens when someone misuses their power to make others feel inferior, hurt, and humiliated. It is a result of unequal power dynamics and is deeply rooted in society's beliefs, norms, and stereotypes. This violence can be carried out by anyone, a partner, family member, coworker, classmate, friend, or even a stranger. It's all about someone wanting to assert their power and control over others in various settings like families, schools, workplaces, communities, and society as a whole. GBV can take many forms, ranging from physical harm, psychological abuse, sexual aggression, cyber violence, and economic control. Gender-based violence has sadly become so normalized and accepted in society that it is often justified through victim blaming, stigmatization, and objectification. This also happens when the existence of gender-based violence is denied or erased altogether. These attitudes minimize its impacts on women, girls, and gender-diverse individuals, making it harder to end gender-based violence. In Canada, colonial systems and laws are a big reason why gender-based violence occurs, especially against First Nation, Métis, and Inuit women. Discrimination based on gender, combined with other forms of discrimination, puts certain groups at even higher risks of GBV. This includes Indigenous and racialized women, women living with disabilities, and young women. Culture, which shapes our values and behaviors, plays a role in perpetuating this violence. It is important to recognize that the dominant culture we are told and taught supports gender-based violence. People from marginalized communities don't just face higher risks of GBV, they're targeted for violence in different ways. This impacts the frequency and intensity of violence, the quality of care they receive, and the barriers they face in accessing supports and services. Survivors of gender-based violence are often silenced and made to feel ashamed, sometimes even believing that the abuse was insignificant and not a crime. This also contributes to higher rates of sexual violence and confusion around the meaning and practice of consent. A study found that in Canada, only 28% of people fully understood what consent means. Creating a culture where consent is respected means getting rid of systems that support unfair treatment and gender inequality. It's a complex process that requires active effort from everyone in society. Gender-based violence is a symptom of gender inequality and power imbalances between men and women and gender-diverse people. As long as gender inequalities persist, we'll continue to see cases of gender-based violence in society. Achieving gender equality requires changing these oppressive systems and structures. It also involves education about the causes and impacts of gender-based violence. We often struggle to say the right thing in a critical moment. Breathe. Imagine someone has come to you to disclose an experience of gender-based violence. Knowing the related terms will help you navigate the conversation and support the person better. Gender-based violence is a term that includes all forms of harm directed at a person because of their sexuality, gender, or gender expression. Gender-based violence is an umbrella term that includes, but is not limited to, sexual violence and tech-facilitated gender-based violence. Sexual violence refers to all acts of violence that are of a sexual nature, whether verbal or physical, through coercion or by force. This form of violence violates an individual's sense of safety. Tech-facilitated gender-based violence takes place online and can take the form of online harassment that targets a person's sexuality, gender, or gender expression, non-consensual distribution of intimate images, online sexual manipulation or coercion, cyberflashing, etc. Intersectionality is a term used to understand the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles or compounding barriers for individuals. Coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to articulate the experiences of Black women, it brought to light how all marginalized groups face vulnerabilities and invisibilities that reflect the intersections of racism, sexism, class oppression, transphobia, ableism, and other systems of oppression. Disclosure is when a person tells someone about their experience of gender-based violence. This may or may not be for the purpose of accessing support, services, and/or accommodations. On the other hand, reporting is a formal process. It means sharing information through specific channels with the intention of initiating an investigation. Rape culture refers to actions and attitudes that normalize sexual violence. It is the way that societies blame those who have experienced violence, minimize or deny their experience, and accept violence as inevitable. Consent culture is a social environment built around mutual consent. It respects a person's bodily autonomy and decisions about their needs and wants. It understands that consent to any activity, including sexual activity, must be ongoing, freely given, informed, and enthusiastic. Survivor-centered is an approach that prioritizes the needs, rights, and wishes of survivors or people who have experienced violence. Some key aspects of this approach include confidentiality, autonomy, dignity, respect, and care. Trauma-informed is an approach that takes into account the connections between violence, trauma, negative health outcomes, and behavior. It involves centering intersectionality and harm reduction to reduce the possibility of re-traumatization. Trauma-informed care is a way of treating people who have experienced trauma in ways that create a sense of safety, trust, and transparency. It is a commitment to not repeat traumatic experiences and, in whatever way possible, to restore a sense of safety, power, agency, and self-worth. Current statistical realities of gender-based and sexual violence. Now that you know the terminology, it is important to know just how pervasive gender-based violence is in Canada. Did you know that approximately 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime? In Canada, 47% of all instances of sexual assault that occurred were committed against women aged 15 to 24. Some groups are more vulnerable to gender-based violence and may face unique barriers and challenges in reporting violence or accessing services. Gender-based violence is experienced differently for people at the intersections of different backgrounds, cultures, and life experiences. These systems create overlapping and interdependent systems of oppression that cannot be understood separately from one another, due to intersecting forms of discrimination and equality. For example, trans and gender diverse people are 1.5 times more likely to experience gender-based violence. Women living with disabilities are 4 times more likely to experience sexual assault. Indigenous women and girls are 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence. Girls and young women in the North experience gender-based violence at a rate 4 times higher than the rest of the Canadian population. This violence is more likely to be severe and result in physical injury. Racialized women who report to law enforcement are less likely to be believed and respected, and their perpetrators systematically receive less severe punishments. It is important to also understand that resources and supports available for people who have experienced violence are not made available to everyone. For example, some crisis centers are limited to only supporting people who identify as women, which means that gender diverse folks are not always welcome in these spaces. Gender-based violence is an underreported crime, with less than 1 in 10 incidents formally reported to the police. For some, the reasons for not reporting include feelings of powerlessness, shame, and distrust in the legal system. Out of those who do file a report, only 22% are satisfied with the outcome. This means that 88% of those who do report are not. This includes students reporting what has happened to them at their schools. Students who reported to their schools shared that there is a lack of confidence in academic institutions' reporting processes. They highlighted the importance of supportive campus solutions that will encourage survivors to come forward. Fear, silencing policies and practices, and cultural norms impact the frequency of reports. These low reporting rates also lead to reporting systems that are unhelpful, making them inaccessible and untrustworthy. When we look at these stats with an intersectional lens, we see that racialized women report at even lower rates because of discrimination and systemic racism that are deeply rooted in policing and security services. Recognizing that GBV is so underreported is especially important to build safer and supported ways for students to disclose when incidents have happened and to empower them to seek resources and services. Understanding gender-based violence on post-secondary campuses. In post-secondary schools, we know that approximately 1 in 5 women will experience some form of sexual violence while attending a post-secondary institution, and that on-campus residences witness 60 to 70% of on-campus sexual assaults. 75% of offenders are people that the victims or survivors know. The first 8 weeks of the school year are particularly high risk, with around 2/3 of incidents happening during this time. The scope of gender-based violence against marginalized communities in post-secondary institutions is less known due to current gaps in research in Canada. Everyone should feel safe at school and everywhere. Unfortunately, this is not so, and gender-based violence is pervasive. There needs to be better supports and responses to these students' experiences. Gender-based violence is justified through the practice of victim blaming, stigmatizing survivors, denying the existence of sexual violence, and the sexual objectification of women. We must change the narrative to create a culture of consent and survivor-centered support. Normalizing conversations about gender-based violence, replacing the current narrative of stigma and discomfort, and replacing it with non-judgmental and compassionate approaches will go a long way in improving these situations. By taking this training, you are helping to take apart rape culture, which has become deeply rooted in everyday society. Context of smaller and remote schools. As part of our work, YWCA Canada launched research to understand the impacts of GBV in smaller communities, remote and rural and northern schools. Unfortunately, there is very little research that speaks directly to GBV on these campuses. For example, most Inuit students may need to relocate to go to attend post-secondary education. Only 19% of Inuit have a post-secondary degree, and this is directly related to the historical trauma, colonization, and intergenerational trauma that has created a culture of distrust between Indigenous people and government systems. So, to properly understand the realities at campuses in remote and northern communities, we conducted focus groups with students in Thompson, Manitoba, and Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Throughout these sessions, we learned that gender-based violence is known to happen very frequently. Participants spoke about a culture of silence and shame as being the reason why people didn't speak about GBV. Even for those who do speak up, we heard that the resolutions are inadequate. We heard stories of no contact orders being in place that were broken on these campuses because they are so small. The individuals didn't want to report this violation and prevent the perpetrator from receiving an education. This situation was particularly underlined by Indigenous students who joined these focus groups and had concern for their fellow colleagues. Because many of these schools are so small, it is often impossible not to see the person, and they didn't want to intervene because they are aware of the links between historical trauma and education attainability. These students' experiences made it clear that the responses to violence that happen in larger post-secondary communities do not transfer the same in these smaller schools. We also heard that tech-facilitated gender-based violence was also common. Those who had themselves or had friends who experienced this form of violence said that when they reported to the police, they were told that it couldn't go anywhere. There was a lot of distrust of the police for students on these campuses. They feared that if they went to someone who didn't know how to respond, they'd be turned to the police or to campus security. Many wished and hoped for more options and autonomy, with an underlying need for culturally competent services. For example, many of the Indigenous students who participated in our focus group indicated that the person they trusted most and would send their friends to is the elder on staff. But what happens when there are no elders on staff? We also heard that many students attending these campuses moved from their home communities and do not know many people or the services in their schools' communities, especially when they first start their degree. We heard that the schools were often not resourced to offer reliable and accessible transition supports like larger institutions do. Students, then, are uncertain of what to do or who to approach if something happens to them. Even if they do know the services available, a large issue raised was that these services are not always permanent, with vacancies in posts being extremely common. Many said that they felt that the responses to disclosures would be sincere, however, that they feared it would be slow to find where to go and what to do because of the misinformation or gaps between departments and the instability of services. These campuses also have smaller communities. Many stated that there was a little division between the campus communities and town community. Campus spaces were often used by both and had many non-students enter the college spaces. This also means that it is very likely that everyone knows everyone. This familiarity can be a barrier for students, as they fear that their experiences will be known by the whole community if they tell someone. We know that perpetrators are often known by the people experiencing violence, and in smaller communities, perpetrators are often networked within the same circles. This adds another layer of hesitation to student disclosures. Anonymity. Many people who have disclosed to you will hope and assume that your conversation will remain anonymous and confidential. Anonymity is key for someone who wants to get support. Survivors often want to protect their identity. They will want you to honor what you have heard in their disclosure. This is why it is important for you and the person who is disclosing to you to know what you can or cannot keep anonymous. Speak to your supervisors or read your institution policies to understand these parameters. Feel free to pause here to review your school policies so that you will be prepared. Recap. That was a big section. You are doing well. That was a lot to learn and to hear. Breathe. In this section, you learn to honor the realities of people who experience gender-based violence. You have learned why gender-based violence happens. You have learned some key terms and the state of GBV that women, gender diverse people, Indigenous people, racialized people, marginalized people, and students face on campus. And you learned about the specific challenges facing people on campuses in smaller and remote post-secondary communities. Part 2. Empower. The impacts of gender-based violence are vast and can affect different areas of a person's life. It can show up when they are at work, while they are studying, or in school. It can impact their mental and physical health and well-being. Gender-based violence is a traumatic experience, and trauma is complicated. These impacts are not the same for everyone, and they will look different for everyone. With the right supports and resources, these effects can be reduced, allowing for healing to occur. It is vital that those who have experienced gender-based violence be the ones to decide what works best for their healing process. Do not be prescriptive or offer solutions. Your role is to ensure that the person has all the information that they need to make the best decisions for themselves. Resources and supports are available. You can find these and share it with them while supporting them in taking next steps, should they decide to do so. Take a moment now to find supports and services on your campus and in your community and write them down. Pay special attention to finding supports available for specific communities. For example, gender diverse people, Indigenous people, racialized people, who are often more comfortable in spaces that are culturally competent and specified as safe for them. Look for hotlines, resource guides, self-care tips, online or in-person counseling support, sexual violence centers, shelters, Indigenous student support, elder, mental health support, community centers, or your local YWCA. Click the link on this webpage titled Supports and Resources for some resources that are available nationally, provincially, or by territory. Do you know of any other resources offered at a larger scale? Write those down too. As we have learned, sexual and gender-based violence are widespread issues in post-secondary institutions. As a result, certain provinces and territories have policies requiring that these schools have procedures in place to appropriately respond to instances of gender-based violence. Click the link on this webpage titled Province and Territory Policies to see what provinces and territories have policies and what they look like. Even if your province does not currently have a policy requiring post-secondary institutions to have procedures in place in responding to gender-based violence, it is possible that one day they will. Keep an eye on the news to see if things change. Now, explore what policies and practices are in place at your school. If the person who disclosed to you wants to report what has happened to them, they are going to need help navigating these policies. Research them now and write them down. Key words to begin finding the options: sexual violence, harassment, code of conduct. Recap. Throughout this section, you've learned how to empower people who have experienced gender-based violence with the available supports, resources, and policies that are available to them. By doing this, you are giving them the power to decide what they need and what to do next. Remember that these policies and resources are living, meaning that they may change over time. Continue to check what is currently available in your province or territory, city, community, and school, so that you are best equipped at supporting the people who disclose that they have experienced violence to you. Part 3. Act. Receiving disclosures of gender-based violence. Someone has just shown incredible strength and vulnerability in sharing a deeply private truth with you. Now that you've equipped yourself with knowledge about the resources, supports, and policies available at your institution, it's time to learn about practical steps to take when responding to disclosures of gender-based violence. Grounded in empathetic listening and a commitment to empowering the person to choose for themselves, use supportive statements like, "I believe you, whatever you are feeling is valid," and reassure them that this is not their fault. Thank them for trusting you and emphasize that you are there to provide support and that they are not alone. Note that it takes courage to support or hear disclosure, but the person who is coming to you is the one who experienced it, and that is even harder. More than likely, someone selected you because they trust you. You have been an ally or shared your experience. This means supporting someone through a disclosure could be triggering for you too. The immediate response a person receives when they share incidents of gender-based violence is an important sign to their well-being following their experience. Negative reactions to disclosures are linked to greater and longer negative impacts. This means that how you respond could change the course of this person's healing journey. It is important that while they tell you their story, you remain present. This can be done through active listening. You can show someone you are listening by facing the person speaking and paying attention to their nonverbal cues. Don't jump to conclusions or interrupt by offering your opinions and solutions. This is their story. Allow them to express themselves in the way that they want. It is important to recognize that what they are sharing is extremely difficult for them. Act with compassion and patience. Don't pry for details. They will share what they wish. Finally, a good way to actively listen is to only plan what to say next when the person is done talking. It is okay to have pauses in your conversation. You want to make sure that you are acknowledging what they are saying. Once they have finished sharing, explain that there are options in terms of support and that they have the choice of which path to pursue. Let them know that a formal complaint is not necessary for a disclosure. Ask them if they would like you to go through some options with them and if they want or need any support from you in taking next steps. This is when you can provide the available services and response options that you have researched. Here, you are enabling the person who has experienced violence to decide what works best for their healing process. Do not offer solutions that you think work best. Ensure the survivor has all the information to make the best decisions for themselves. Here are some questions you can ask them. Do they wish to seek medical attention for physical injury? Do they wish to access mental health supports? Do they wish to access academic supports? Mention that there are on and off-campus resources, experts in this work who can better address next steps. Ask if they would like to go through these options. Do they wish to formally report what has happened to them to the school? Do they wish to report to the police? It is important to acknowledge that police services can be a tool of violence against racialized and other marginalized groups. This has impacted current relationships between the police and communities, but you should offer all and any options to the person who is disclosed to you to empower their decisions and next steps. Many community support services can help navigate interactions with police, and if this is an option they wish to look into, you can offer support in finding these services. Responding to tech-facilitated gender-based violence with empathy. We have just gone through how you can empathetically respond to disclosures of gender-based violence. This includes responding to tech-facilitated gender-based violence with the same empathy. It is important to know that online violence is widely normalized and minimized because it happens online. This form of violence is on the rise and is extremely complex as technology continues to evolve and change so rapidly. It is often also falsely relegated as an inevitable risk of the internet. Online spaces are very much gendered. They reinforce offline inequities and stereotypes. And it is important that we understand that these spaces reflect our societies, often in heightened ways. Women in universities, often avid technology users, face increased risk. Misunderstandings about consent, especially in digital contexts, are very common among young Canadians. Furthermore, these spaces have little regulation. This results in people who have experienced online violence internalizing the blame. Reassure them that what has happened to them is not their fault, and that online violence is violence, and the harm is unacceptable. Responses to in-person and tech-facilitated gender-based violence are the same. However, the possible next steps vary. Here is what you can do when responding to a disclosure of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. Once they have shared their experience, ask them if they would like to report what has happened to them. Reporting to the platform can get the image or intimate content taken down, can block the person who has caused violence from the platform, remove them from the platform, and much more. It is important to review the community standards and guidelines of the platforms because each vary in different ways. It is also important to prepare them that response times and outcomes vary across platforms. Reporting to authorities is an option for all forms of technology-facilitated violence, including over text or phone calls. However, remember to remind them of the harms this may cause. It is important to note here that tech-facilitated violence may also be covered by a school policy. Make sure you know what the next steps are for reporting this to the school. If they wish to report, ask them if they would like support and guidance in doing this. This could be from you, or you could refer them to an expert and introduce them to different on and off-campus supports and resources available. If they wish to report to the platform, let them know that they can also get their friends to report the content if it's public so that it is more likely to get taken down, if they feel comfortable doing so. Offer to refer them to relevant support services and resources that you have found. Regardless of whether they choose to report or not, mention that it is important to collect all evidence from the platform. Here are some tips you can offer about how to store digital evidence. Take screenshots and email them to yourself. Make sure that screenshots of phone calls and texts show the phone number of the individual and not their contact name. Although this can be difficult, try not to add, edit, or delete any details to, of, or from the digital evidence. If they are not comfortable having this on their device, let them know that they can share this with a trusted friend or family member to store for them. Recap. In this section, you have learned how to act when someone has disclosed an experience of gender-based violence, whether it has happened in person or online. It is important that your role is a supportive one. People who have experienced this form of violence often feel powerless. Providing them with the tools to make informed decisions towards next steps restores their power and control. This is their journey. They have trusted you with their story, and it is important that you preserve that trust and take meaningful actions. Part 4. Refer and reach out. You have honored, empowered, and acted on behalf of the person who has told you about their experience of gender-based violence. It is important that this trust remains. You have offered your support by referring them to supports and resources. This support does not end when the conversation between both parties is over. Make sure that you check in. This can be via email or in person. This helps the person who has disclosed to you feel like they are supported and cared for in an ongoing way. Ask them how they are and remind them that you are there for them if they need anything, including help in reaching out to more support services or in taking next steps in reporting. Even if the individual doesn't respond to you in reaching out, they still know you are there if they need anything. Part 5. Trauma-informed care. At every step, engaging with someone who has experienced violence requires care to avoid or minimize adding new stress or inadvertently reminding them of past traumas. This commitment must guide your actions and support, offer choice, confidentiality, and allow the individual to guide the process. Providing trauma-informed care helps the person who is disclosed to you engage more openly and develop trust with you. It is a way of treating people who have experienced trauma in ways that create a sense of safety, trust, and transparency. It is a commitment to not repeat traumatic experience and, in whatever way possible, to restore a sense of safety, power, agency, and self-worth. Trauma-informed care decreases the chances of re-traumatization. This is when a situation, attitude, reaction, or environment replicates the events or dynamics of the original trauma and triggers the overwhelming feelings and reactions associated with them. You may be asking yourself, what causes re-traumatization? This can happen when someone responding to disclosures is unaware of the possibilities of traumatic histories, isolates rather than listens and connects, uses confrontational approaches, is authoritative and does not provide choice, and challenges or discounts the person who is disclosing experiences. This is why it is so important to be aware of trauma when responding to disclosures. To do this, it is important to know trauma-informed care's core principles: safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, and humility and responsiveness. It also means recognizing how colonization creates complex forms of trauma. Throughout this training, you have learned to honor, empower, act, and refer and reach out. Providing trauma-informed care is what weaves all these sections together in a way that truly believes, supports, and recognizes what a person who has disclosed has gone through. Having someone who has experienced violence share their story can be difficult for them, but also for you. It is okay to feel overwhelmed, nervous, and sad by what you are hearing. The following tips can be used by both you and the person who has disclosed. Taking a few moments to be kind to yourself and to do things that make you happy can make all the difference. Ask both the person who has experienced gender-based violence and yourself what helps when you are feeling stressed. Is it a walk outdoors, spending time with your friends and family, listening to music? Identify the activities that help them and you distress and decompress. Here are some tangible steps individuals can take to attend to their own needs and move forward in their healing journey. Ensuring they are getting enough sleep, breathing and relaxation practices, journaling, planning or scheduling one's days, positive affirmations, physical exercise, making time for hobbies, reminding oneself of the things they are grateful for. By having these tools for self-care that you can use or that you can provide the person who has told you their story with, you are recognizing that what has happened to them and what you have heard is a traumatic experience. You have gone through supports and next steps with them, but it is also important to recognize the healing journey that they are about to go through. Honor, empower, act, refer and reach out, trauma-informed care, HEART. These are the core skills you have learned throughout this training. You are now equipped to respond to disclosures of gender-based violence empathetically. Remember that every person is different, and their experiences will have different impacts on their lives. You are a person who they have trusted with a very traumatic experiences. Take these steps to be respectful and accountable to their openness, trust, and vulnerability. Make sure to download the resource documents, the toolkit that disseminates the information you have just learned in an accessible way, and the poster you can put on your door or desk so students know you have taken this training. Thank you for taking a step in doing your part to dismantle rape culture and create a safer and more supportive campus culture. You are now properly equipped to heart people who have experienced gender-based violence. This toolkit and training were made possible because of the time and energy of many people who supported this work. Special mention goes to Rain Lillefeld, Jolyn Joseph, Jenny Cloutier, Georgia Lapierre, Natasha Stevens, Rebecca Pacheco, Mahara Azad, and Anissa Kazoun for their countless hours of work towards this project. YWC Canada would also like to thank our reviewers, Denya Azera, Heather Evans, Lorette George, and Stephanie Lander for their insights.